So The Inheritance is a film that came out this year in 2024, and nobody really has talked about it. With the talented Peyton List on the cover, I decided to give it a watch. Was it worth it? Well, first off, the story kicks off whenever Charles Abernathy, a wealthy 75-year-old man, invites his estranged children to his giant doggone mansion for his birthday. Once they arrive, things aren't as they seem, since he sent all of his staff and security home, all besides his most trusted friend, who greets them at the door and later locks them within, with their permission of course. See, Charles believes someone or something is going to kill him that night. To ensure his survival, he dangles his kid's inheritance as bait, promising that if he dies, everything will be donated to charity, leaving them with nothing at all, which, although clever, is super awful for a father to do, putting his kids at risk for the safety of himself. What a scumbag move. The rest of the characters are a mixed bag as well, each bringing their own quirks and in turn issues to the table. Drew, the son who distanced himself from the family, is portrayed as the good guy, the hero. He is kind, runs a charity, tries to get along with his siblings, even whenever he doesn't agree with them. He loves his father, but hates the life that accompanies said father, and due to that has decided to keep his distance, no matter how easy it would be for him out of all of the children to visit. His wife, Hannah, fits the final girl mold from her first moments on screen, even as she tries to navigate the family's, let's call it complicated dynamics. She shares the same compassionate traits as Drew, but with far better temperament, since she hasn't had to deal with the more entitled of the Abernathy family for as long. Speaking of the entitled, we have the twins, Madeline and CJ, who are all about the money. They have dedicated their lives to making their father proud at the expense of enjoyment, passions, and even love. Although there is some tragedy in their story to make them a little more likable, mixed with iffy performances, they are not the most likable at all. I can't even blame the actors for how the acting came off. Honestly, the script and dialogue was so wooden in regards to them that I got bored enough to build a house during a few scenes that they were tasked to carry. Last but certainly not least, we have the youngest Cammy, who's more interested in her social media presence than anything else. She's played by the reason I ever even considered watching the film to begin with, Peyton List, and she was a standout amongst the rest of the cast, adding energy and expressiveness that makes the rest of the actors seem amateur in comparison. They weren't even bad, she just did so good that the disconnect was super noticeable, especially as the film goes on. Some performances were super stiff some moments, which may have been the point, but didn't stop it from being boring to watch and even more boring to listen to. All the characters were serviceable thanks to the actors, but they fell too far into tropes to truly be memorable in any real way once the movie finally comes to an end, which given what happens to them is the drive of the plot. Besides the mystery of course, it does cause some damage. Apart from the actors, one of the film's highlights is its setting. The mansion is a character in itself almost. With its eerie atmosphere and historic feel, the cinematography does a great job of capturing the spookiness of the house, making it the perfect location for all that unfolds, even if it isn't utilized to its fullest potential. The mansion's creaky floors, dimly lit hallways, and hidden rooms add to the suspense, creating a sense of claustrophobia and a fear of the unknown. But that unknown also leaves a lot to be explored, and because of that, it leaves a big house feeling rather empty at times. It wasn't too noticeable until the very end, so it's not necessarily a demerit, but once I reached the ending, it did cause some issues with the in-universe logic itself. Actually, speaking of the universe, as the night progresses, the tension between the family members starts to escalate. There are moments of genuine suspense and a few well-executed scares, but the horror often falls back on familiar horror tropes, which can feel a bit predictable. It's like the filmmakers wanted to blend the best parts of Ready or Not, You're Next, and Within, but didn't quite hit the mark in any real way. Logic gets kinda disregarded at times for dramatic effect. Whether it's how a gun is being handled, how characters react to situations, how they get out of them, and how the house is utilized can go against pre-established consistency or real-world expectations in ways that is extremely noticeable. It bothered me more than I care to admit and felt like it was worth pointing out. Since we are talking about consistency though, one of the film's biggest issues is its pacing. The initial setup is honestly really intriguing, but once the horror elements kick in, the film struggles to maintain its momentum. The familial dynamics, which should be the heart of the story, feel shoved together at random. The switch up between characters aren't always natural. The relationships between them aren't explored enough, and the first portion of the film is pretty much dedicated to exploring them, so I'm not entirely sure how that happened. It just feels like so much wasted time given how little development we actually get. First time I'm going to say, and don't clip this out of context, but the story would have actually benefited from incest. Between the twins specifically, I mean. I'm not even kidding. We needed something to bind these people together and there just wasn't anything here. Anyway, the score is another element that doesn't quite hit the mark. It's often intrusive, it overpowers the scenes and distracts from what actually takes place within them. The music choices feel admittedly pretty generic, which is a common criticism from horror, I know, but it still applies nonetheless, which again is a shame since I love the soundtracks in all my media, anime specifically, and they are a huge part of my enjoyment factor, especially when emotions are impacted or in some cases even reliant on said music. Despite its many flaws that I've brought up, The Inheritance does have its moments. There are scenes that kept my attention and made me want to know more. The mystery actually starts out really well, with a few twists that land far better than I ever expected them to. I just wish the mystery aspect was kept a mystery a little better, but I digress. The ambition of the cast and crew is honestly commendable, even if it doesn't always succeed. It's clear that the filmmakers had a vision, which really matters in terms of the respect that I have for a film. It doesn't feel generic alone, just feels like they didn't have the knowledge to reach the heights that their imagination could come up with, so then they had to rely on generic horror tropes in order to push their vision along. Imagination aside, the horror elements are a mixed bag as well. There are some genuinely creepy moments, but they are often overshadowed by predictable jump scares and cliche horror tropes. You can pretty much predict what's going to happen next at times, but there are a few unpredictable moments that do help circumvent that, to a point anyway. The film does try to build a sense of dread and tension, and to be blunt, it doesn't always succeed. The horror feels more like an afterthought rather than the main focus, like they wanted to make two separate films but only had the budget for one, so they kinda just shoved them both together to see what works. And it does work, well, kind of, but only at times. As a full product, it's definitely going to depend on how well you handle the twist throughout, let's just put it that way. The length of the film, when within it those twists take place, doesn't feel balanced either. At just over an hour and a half, it feels both too long and somehow too short as well. Some scenes drag on at a snail's pace, while other scenes feel like Turbo kicked it into high gear and decided to race to the finish line. If films have to have a lot going on at all times to keep your attention, then this isn't for you, that's for sure. Oh yeah, also the special effects are actually pretty decent. There are a few standout moments, but for the most part, the effects are serviceable at the least. They do their job without drawing too much attention to themselves, besides a couple scenes that have actually stuck with me a little bit, both because of their suddenness, their visuals, and the impact that they had. Anyway, yeah, I think that's all I have to say. The Inheritance is a film that had a lot of potential, but didn't quite live up to it. It's a decent watch if you're in the mood for some light horror with a bit of family drama thrown in. Just don't go in expecting some kind of mind-blowing affair. The ending scenes are also a little unsatisfying. They do take inspiration from other films, but not standing out on their own because of it, even though one had the ability to if it was, of course, paced a little bit better, but oh well. What do you think? Does The Inheritance sound like something you'd want to watch, or do you have another film in mind? Let me know in the comments below, and for more news, reviews, and whatever whatever we choose. Stay tuned to Nerdsfeed. Have a great day. Thank you.